Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the Series 11 penultimate story, It Takes You Away, written by Ed Himes and is directed by Jamie Childs. This story is quite unique in the grand scheme of Doctor Who, but also as well in Series 11. With one aspect which we won't be talking about until later on in the video, but one aspect that is actually really interesting is that this story is a modern setting story. It's something that Doctor Who is familiar with, especially the revived era of Doctor Who, and Series 11. In fact, Series 11 has been is great at balancing in terms of how many stories of its past stories, its future stories, and its modern day setting stories. However, unlike all the other modern day stories in Series 11, this story is set in Norway, giving a completely different feel from the Sheffield-centered stories of Series 11, which is quite cool if you ask me. And I think it's something that Doctor Who should happen set more often. Stories set outside of the UK. Why don't we get more of these, please? Stop sending it in London. Stop sending it in like some boring old city, and let's get out there and see the world. Thank you, Chris Chibnall's era of Doctor Who. You're giving us what at least I want anyway, more like experiences of the world and the universe. That's Doctor Who is all about. This, unlike any other penultimate story in the modern era of Doctor Who, this is much more in line of a classic era penultimate episode, in which it doesn't actually connect with the final episode at all, apart from the common themes of each story of each series. But in terms of plot lines, in terms of setting up the grand storyline, story arc, with big twists and paying off a lot of villains and stuff like that. The story doesn't set up anything like that for the finale of the episode, the Battle of Ran Skolos. But this, I actually prefer it like this, where it's much more in line of certain other series, like not penultimate episodes, but the ones before. For example, Blink and Midnight, where it's much more low-key. It's a lot less characters in a much more cheaper location. Out of all the episodes in Series 11, this is clearly the cheapest to make, because they literally just set it in the middle of nowhere. And we don't really get a big giant monster of sorts, or at least nothing that's specifically visually stated for the most part. We get down to the ending. But yeah, Ed Himes has, this is his first script for Doctor Who. He would later go on to write a story in Series 12. He usually tackles, in his writing, political allegories, specifically to do with climate change. In fact, in 2019, he was actually arrested for for protesting against climate deniers and stuff like that. So Ed Himes is a really cool dude, and deserves our full response. I can't get my words out today. But yeah, anyway, the Doctor and crew, consisting at this time Graham, played by Bradley Walsh, Ryan, played by Toshin Coyle, and Yaz, played by Mandip Gill, all find themselves in Norway, seemingly out of randomness, and they discover that there's this little cottage. They go to investigate, only to find that it's barricaded, and they also encounter a young blind girl named Hannah, played by Eleanor Walwork, who is actually the first blind actress to be in Doctor Who. And she basically explains to our characters that her father has disappeared, and there seems to be monsters outside. She can hear the monsters outside in the woods, and they come around about the same time, and she hides from him inside the house, and she's waiting for her father, and it's up to our crew to essentially find the father and stop this monster on the outside. And what I do like about this story is that, unlike, like every other story in Series 11, it is very wordy. There is a lot of dialogue. There is a lot of characters talking and stuff like all the other episodes. But here it kind of feels earned because they are talking to a blind character who is very vulnerable in the fact that she is a kid who has been living on her own for a while. I can't remember what she said. I think she said 2 weeks, maybe a month. And what I like about this story is that each character kind of has a different relationship to this dynamic. Probably the most interesting one at the moment is Ryan, in which because his relationship with his father is a lot less stable, shall we say. He basically is like, right, the girl is lying, the father left and ran, and she's come up with this story to try and comfort herself, and he's taking like a very bleak approach to the dynamic. With Yaz, is like, stop that, that's ridiculous. Even if it's true, why would you say it to the kid? And she tries comforting the kid down and trying to reinforce her beliefs in that. We'll talk about Yaz later on. And Graham, he just wants to help in this environment, and he gets some of the greatest laughs. There's a great moment where he brings out a sandwich, and then he goes into detail about how in stories like Rosa, he didn't have any food and he gets starving because of his high blood pressure. He needs to, keep eating. So he always brings a sandwich on the go, and all the characters are just like, what the hell? And the doctor gets involved. She does try and help, but she does, look at the situation more realistically, and she does try and investigate what the creature is, and she basically is the investigator of the story. Now, this story is like, for the first half, it's one of those stories which changes perspective second way through the story, because the second half of the story we'll talk about later, but for the first half you got that, like, there's plot line of the monster in the outside and our characters trying to defend themselves. Essentially a Base Under Siege story for the first half of the episode, with a little twist halfway through the story. And so we only get really one character yet to be introduced to, which and because we got a large cast of characters, that should mean that this story should be more well balanced than other previous stories in the series, right? Because that's one of the big complaints about the story, about the series, is that there's too many characters. We have 3 companions, and most of the stories feature a lot of characters. So a story where mostly they interact with one character should be signs of success, or at least a sign for improvement anyway. Well, I think this is where Ed Himes kind of struggles here, because though we do get character moments from our characters, not all of them feel well plenished in this narrative. Main example, and I think the best example, will be Yaz, who we basically get that bit at the start where she comforts the girl, and we later see when her and Ryan are investigating a shed to try and find some tools or to find out any information about the father. Ryan's just like, you're very good with kids, and she's like, yeah, I did some training trying to comfort kids and trying to reassure them. You basically just got to reassure what they believe in, and that's that's part of the development that I really wanted from Yaz. She is one of the few police officers that has been in the TARDIS, who's had that kind of training, or at least some sort of adventure experience in danger. She should be a very unique character in the canonicity of Doctor Who. But after that scene, the Yaz and Hannah's dynamic is completely gone. They don't bring it up about like her being the police officer. She doesn't try to encourage her because she's mainly left with Ryan at this scene, and we get a lot of character dynamic with Ryan, which is actually really cool at the first half, as they start to hate each other to begin with, as she can't stand him because she didn't like the fact that he said that his father would run away. And he does kind of realize it's not cool, but they try and have this little bond with each other and try and get through it. Though Ryan still thinks about the father being not up to her standards as she initially thought. He takes it into the fact that she believes anyway that her father didn't leave her. And whilst they are believed to be attacked by some sort of creature in story, Graham discovers an interdimensional portal inside the house. In fact, it's a mirror dimension. However, inside the mirror, there is something called, I can't remember what it's called, it's the null zone or zero zone or something like that, which is basically like a buffer zone to try and stop two realities which cannot combine, which cannot function separate from each other from as physically possible. And the Doctor investigates this and believes that her father might have actually been kidnapped from the inside, as Ryan discovers quite early on that there are speakers around the house, and that's what the creature monsters are. There is no creature in the woods. It was someone, presumably Hannah's dad, Eric, who had taken this up to effect. So our characters then, the story completely takes a 180, and it becomes this story about this interdimensional portal. We do get a little side third story here, a second story, sorry, to lead into the bigger third story, which is the main focus of the narrative. But Yaz, Graham and the Doctor, they go into this interdimensional portal, they go into this buffer zone, and they be introduced to probably one of my favourite characters of the 13th Doctor era. This is Ribbons of the Seven Stomachs. He's just this really weird character, played by Kevin Eldon, I believe, and he's just, there's just something about him. He has that kind of trader approach where he's talking about, you know, like, something of value, trade is possible, you give me and I give you. But he's also this kind of scum who will do anything he will to be like in the higher position of bargaining. He does really want to get the sonic screwdriver, and that sounded really wrong. If this was the male incarnation, he wanted the sonic screwdriver, the Doctor's sonic screwdriver. But anyway, and what a great example is that the Doctor ties this string to try and find their way back when they're trying to get back to their dimension. However, Ribbons tricks them by letting them go in a little bit further, and he cuts the wire, and then he leaves them basically stranded there. And he also tells them at one point to run to get away from these creatures called the moth. I can't remember what they're called, the hungry moths, the big moths, which basically eat off flesh moths. They're called flesh moths because they eat flesh. But he stays still, and the Doctor quickly realizes that Ribbons actually wants them all dead by letting them run, and then he can take the sonic screwdriver. And there's just so many strange details to this character. We quickly learn at one point that he has nothing to do with it. He's not really like a villain of the story. He is like an antagonist, but he's not the villain of the story. He didn't do anything to Eric or Hannah. He's just some guy that lives in this interdimensional buffer zone, and he seemingly can go whenever he wants. He can escape whenever he likes, but he decides to live here, and it's never explained. And I absolutely love it. It makes him such a strange, interesting character, and like there's this kind of like, he kind of maybe enjoys living this kind of way, almost like he's like the interdimensional universe's version of Bear Grylls, because they keep mentioning the fact that like he smells of wee, and then he states at one point it's not my wee, kind of implying that he rubs like animal feces or stuff over himself so that like he can better survive. He basically wants you to just like, he just seems to enjoy this much more harsher environment, which is just like the implication of this is just purely by the fact that he's there. I don't know why, he just absolutely love this character. There's just something so memorable about him. Also, I think one of the bigger factors on what makes him such a great character, the directing in the buffer zone. It's literally just like a cave. I don't know if it's a set or they generally did find a cave, but there's these red light balls that they use to keep the flesh moths off, and there's these like blue lights onto the red, onto the clashing. The directing, the lighting, Jamie Childs' camera work here is absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely well deserving of some of the best Doctor Who directors up there in the series. It is simple, but it really is effective, and it really gives this story, or at least these scenes anyway, a really interesting dynamic. But then we lead into our third and our main plot line as our characters find themselves on the other end of the mirror, the other end of the dimension, and they find Eric, played by Christian Rubeck, and he's completely fine. In fact, he knows that there's no monster. In fact, he knows that there's nothing to be concerned of. There's nothing to be afraid of. Go back to your own dimension. I'll look after Hannah fine. Just, she's just a scared teenager girl. I'll just put those things up to try and keep her there. I'll find her and I'll take her here. And there's nothing to worry about. You can go. And the doctor goes in and is just like, why the hell are you doing here? Who's the other person? Who's the other guest? And he's just like, what are you on about? But the doctor notices there's 2 plates, only to discover that Hannah's mother, who we learned really early on in the story and is part of the development of the characters and why they're living here, is that Eric's mother's died. Not Eric's mother, sorry, Hannah's mother's died, Eric's wife, and they moved to this little bit of Norway, and then that was like part of like the character beats. But we find here that Hannah's mother, Eric's wife, is alive in this dimension, and she's completely fine. And he's living with his interdimensional ghost wife, I guess. I mean, she's not a ghost; she is physically present, and she seemingly is alive. And our characters are completely stunned and baffled by this, but they know that you do have a daughter at home. You do have somebody who loves and cares you. You need to get back to them. You need to get back to Hannah. To which Hannah's mother replies, well, don't you want to see your friend? She arrived at the same time as you did. And our characters all look confused as she takes them outside. And we get reintroduced to Sharon D. Clarke's Grace character. Graham's wife and Ryan's grandmother. And she remembers everything that happened in The Woman Who Fell to Earth. She remembers dying. She remembers being killed. But she somehow woke up in this dimension. And what I really love about this story, what really sells the story, is Bragley Walsh's performance. Like, you could see the pain and anguish in his face. It's like, this is not fair. You can't do this to me. Like, there you are. You're alive. You're well. And he goes into these details about like how he met Rosa Parks and how he he's gone to space. He's gone to another planet. But he wants to take her with him back into their main dimension. But the Doctor quickly realizes. Now, there is a scene where the Doctor goes into detail, into a big explaining scenes with Yaz. The first half sucks, and basically she realizes from a fairy tale her grandmother told her, her granny told her, that this universe is the entity known as the Solatrax. Essentially, at the start of the universe, we had all these concepts which were just waiting, ready to create a new universe before the Big Bang. Maths, science, biology, geography, space and time. But they weren't combining, they weren't meddling, because a creature, another universe, a sentient universe called the Solatrax, got in the way. It was in the middle, and when Solatrax energy is involved, these combinations of the universe cannot form, they cannot function. It's like putting jigsaw pieces in the wrong places. So somehow the Solatrax got kicked out of a pre-birthed universe, and so all the maths and science and stuff got in and became our universe as we know it. And she basically proclaims that this is the Solatrax universe. This is the sentient universe which stopped our universe from being born many, 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 many years ago. How did she put these two together? I mean, don't get me wrong, she hears the idea, she goes to another universe. Like, another universe which has, our resemblance of a world. It has people. It has the house she has. It has a planet. It's basically a parallel universe, and she somehow connects it to a story her grandmother told her about a sentient entity universe. Like, the Doctor has gone to multiple universes, different universes before, most noticeably in Inferno and Army of Ghosts and Rise of the Cybermen. Yeah, I just realised I got the titles mixed up. Age of Steel and Rise of the Cybermen. That's the one. So in those stories, he never, in the male incarnation, never connected the universes to the solar tracks. But here, just as so happens as it is the solar tracks, maybe there's some information that the Doctor isn't privy in Yaz to. Who knows? But that story, she goes into the detail about the solar tracks, about how the universes combined. That bit's beautiful. It's mainly of how she comes to the realization that this is the solar tracks that really rubs me the wrong way in this scene. But in terms of like her describing what the solar tracks is and the origins of the solar tracks, absolutely beautiful. And basically realizes that Grace and Eric's wife, Hannah's mother, they're basically a trap to try and keep them in this universe, to try and keep them inside this dimension. So the Doctor has to try and convince Graham that Grace isn't real. And Bradley Walsh's performance here, where he's just like, you can't make me choose. I know what you're asking me, Doctor, and I know, there is a right and wrong here where I gotta go back. But I can't. I just can't go without Grace. And Grace, like, refuses to let him go. It's like, you gotta stay here. Otherwise, if I go in through the portal, I will be injured. I will be died, at least painfully. If not, I'll just get killed again. And it absolutely breaks his heart. And what convinces him that she is not Grace, that she is a fake, is that they basically learn, because Hannah comes through the portal, and because Hannah and Ryan go through the portal halfway through the third story, because she knocks him out and takes the key to the attic, and Ryan follows after he wakes up. And basically Ryan's in danger. Ryan's going to be killed by the interdimensional buffer, which is getting slowly decaying, because they all of this main universe matter is going into the Soul Tracks matter universe, and that spread another universe, which I was talking about earlier, that is basically taking effect. And Grace is just like, no, you can't leave. You've got to stay here. And it clicks. It's like, Grace would never in a million years have let Ryan go into any sort of danger. I wish you weren't, but you're fake. And it is a conviction he has because of that particular fact. And the way he slowly gets up, the way he absolutely hates the fact that, this is a fake. And he really wishes it to be real. I think it's mainly Bradley Walsh's performance that really nails it here, but Endtime's script really delivers that much of a performance from him. It's really, really great television. However, there is a big issue not plot-wise, but character-wise in this story, which you might have realised. Just going by the description. But if you haven't realised, Grace is a character who's mostly connected to two characters. Brian, Graham O'Brien, who he gets all the emotional hook and you get the emotional parts of. And Ryan, who doesn't get a single scene with the resurrected Grace, or the Solid Tracks Grace. Doesn't get a single moment with her, and finds out later on in the episode that about like in the aftermath, in the closing parts of the story, that Graham had this experience with his dead wife, with his grandmother, and like it's just like, yeah, that sounded really messed up. We miss her. And it's like, that is a nice beat of emotional, but the story could have been so much more if Ryan also went into the portal earlier on in the story and was also the one who would have, connected with Grace as well, because he has an emotional connection. He's her grandson, for crying out loud. But there's some reason they took Yaz, which kind of took that emotional connection between her and Hannah out. But I also understand that if you leave Yaz with Hannah, you kind of have this really big emotional plot line. And then you've also got then the Yaz comforting a kid plot line, which might not seem as interesting compared to the big emotional hooking storyline here, and might mean that Yaz kind of feels half out. But when she's in the Solitax universe, the Doctor and Yaz really is kind of just like in the background for the most part. She gets a quite funny little reference to reverse the polarity of the neutron flow, a classic Doctor Who catchphrase from the third Doctor era. But apart from that, what was the point of Yaz in this story? Like, there's so much potential at the start, but it doesn't end up. Now we're going to have to talk about the end of the story, where our Solitax duplicates, basically the trick is gone. It's the illusion is gone, and the Doctor and Eric are basically left in this universe, and the Doctor's like, right, you've won. You've taken Eric away from his daughter, taken away from this universe. However, you sure you want him? Like, I've seen all the universe. I can tell you all these amazing things. Whereas he's got a daughter that still loves him and needs him, and he's just a regular guy. To which then the Solitax decides to kick Eric out. And the Doctor stays with the universe, the Solitax universe. What happens next is surprisingly controversial between Doctor Who fans. Some people are split in between. Where some people are split in between. They're between 2 points. You either really love this episode, this ending, should I say, or you really hate this ending. I absolutely love it. In which the Doctor, basically the Solitax universe is decaying, and they're basically left in like a white void version of the attic, and the Doctor starts communicating with the real sentient form of the Solitax, who takes the form of a frog with Sharon D. Clarke's voice. And it's surreal, it's weird, it's very Douglas Adams-y. But like, it's strange, it's like strange concept. Like, the creature can take any form it wants, and it wants to be a frog. I love it. It's that weird, bizarre stuff that makes me gravitate towards Doctor Who in the begin with. But what makes this ending such a great emotional hook is the Doctor's speech at the end, where she's talking about like how the universe is amazing and it's big. No words can describe it. It's big and beautiful, and there's so many people. There's so much people there who are brave and they're strong, and I need you to be brave for me as well, because me being in this universe is still unstable, as she shows with this really cool 3D hand effect. Basically realizing that even with just the Doctor in the Solitax universe, the universe is still in danger. So, and as the Doctor says, like, you've got to let me go. You've got to let me back. Yes, you will be alone, and yes, it will be painful. But just know that you have friends, that you do have someone like me, and I will always remember you. I will never forget you. I made a friend today, and so have you. And I will do anything to my best to try and convince to go back to yours, and you come back to me. And you are lonely, but you've got to be strong for me, please. And so the Solitax universe kicks her out of her, and the Doctor, to where I first realised the 13th Doctor theme, runs out of the buffer zone with the 13th theme playing in the background, running to the other mirror, to the other dimension. Absolutely stunning ending. I'm sorry for those of you who don't like it, but why? Because it's silly, because she talks to a interdimensional demon thing, which takes the form of a frog with Graham's dead wife Ryan's grandmother's voice. It's ridiculous, yes, it's silly, yes, but it's also really, really, really just like interesting. You cannot tell me you've seen that in any other... You can't even say that you've seen that in any other Doctor Who story before. Like, It's mainly the speech that the Doctor gives that I absolutely love and I absolutely adore about this particular scene. It's not, though there's a silly weirdness, and I think I would have agreed with people who didn't like the ending. If it was just silly and weird just for the sakes of it being silly and weird, but the story does kind of give it the point where you see this lonely kind of small pathetic creature on a stool with a voice of a loved one, and the Doctor is so like she can feel its pain, but she also she needs to say goodbye, and she doesn't want to, but she has to because she's never met a creature like her before. It's so cool to her. And it kind of breaks her heart. This is also leading into one of the things I was talking about earlier about this story is very unique. This story doesn't have a main villain. The Solitrex kind of counts. It does unintentionally do harm to our characters. But it doesn't have any villainous intent. It just is lonely and wants people to communicate to. And at the end of the story, the Solitrex lets the Doctor go. It becomes essentially a full-on good guy by the end of the story. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. The story starts wrapping up with Eric returning to Hannah, saying that he need to go back into the city life. And we get a small moment where Graham, he's looking out in the forest, he's feeling, all the emotions throughout the episode. And Ryan, throughout the series, Graham's trying to get Ryan to call him Grandad. It is a very strange plotline. However, Ryan does call him Grandad at the end of this story. It's very weird because the story, if Ryan was part of the team that goes into the Solitrex universe, this story would have been a fantastic finale for the series. You've got that emotional hook. You've got the paying off of Graham's emotional struggle of him being a survivor whilst his wife died. And Ryan losing one of the only people he really cared about in his life, his grandmother, after his father abandoned him and his mother passed away when he was very young. And it's just like, they finally reconnect. They're finally connecting. He's calling him Grandad, and Graham now officially, I should say, has a grandson. He's been calling him grandson throughout the story, but now he officially is his grandson. And that's a sweet moment. I do understand the criticism, though, that it comes out of nowhere and it just sums up a plot line of just them trying to call him Grandad throughout the series. I do understand that, but I do think it really works here, especially what this story has in told for it. If you watch this story without the rest of the story arc, it works perfectly fine, and that ending works perfectly fine with this story. And so it takes you away. Overall, this is probably one of my favourite 13th Doctor stories. Easily my favourite modern era story in the 13th Doctor era. Series 11 does have a really strong list, so I don't know if it consists of my favourite Series 11 story. That probably goes to Demons of the Punjab. But it's so good. It's so good. There is some missing elements that stops it from being a really great story. Ryan and Yaz don't really have any emotional struggle outside the first act. And the missed opportunity of Ryan being part of the Grace storyline is so massive and obvious that anybody with 2 cells would have gone, why did you make the creative decision to take Ryan away from this? And Yaz, of course, after one scene, completely drops her character to be a kind of a background character for the rest of the story. However, the emotional hook on this story is really well developed. The stuff with Graham just breaks my heart, and Bragley Walsh probably has one of his best performances in the series. Jodie Whittaker gets one of the best speeches from the ending of this story, and the detail on how the Solitax is created. Though, like I said, I don't like how she comes to that conclusion of the Solitax being involved in the story. But that's beside the point. It has its flaws, yes. But does the emotional connection, do the emotions matter? And I would argue the story has its focus on the right place. And so that it takes you away. Now, before we get into the finale of Series 11, we will be taking a sidestep into the world of novels for a story which I don't know anything about, so I can't even go into any sort of detail about. So join me next time for the novel Molten Heart, and I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-ra.